I would like to just share about Dr. Krashen to kind of introduce him, that he is an American linguist, educational researcher, and activist who is professor emeritus of education at the University of Southern California. He is the author of more than 525 articles and books in the field of bilingual education, neurolinguistics, second language acquisition, and literacy. He's best known for his work in establishing a general theory of second language acquisition and the co-founder of the natural approach, as he's the inventor of the sheltered subject matter teaching. So, Stephen, is there anything else you'd like me to add, or that you'd like to add to that prestigious, like prolific amount of writing and sharing that you've done in your
You
career?
left out the most important things.
Okay.
I was the 1972 incline bench press champion of Venice Beach. Okay.
Awesome.
That was pretty
I
good.
didn't even know. Always
And
surprised.
I met Arnold there
Oh,
on Venice Beach, and he would come by and he would say, "Oh, very good. Try it this way." Very friendly guy. It was wonderful. So,
awesome.
okay, that's it.
You're brushed with fame, huh?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing the most important details. And as I said, I put those two links in the chat so you can open them up, save them for yourself. I'll also be posting those two links on our multilingual learner hub through Towson University. It's meant to support teachers and families of multilingual learners. And that is the last link that I'm going to add in the chat right now, that third link. So if you open that up, after I kind of get this edited and I get everything together, we're going to be posting that on the webinars portion of our hub for educators. So you can share this out with other colleagues if you would like to afterwards, or go back and revisit yourself. And with that, Stephen, I think I will share my screen of the outline that you're kind of walking us through today in your engaging talk with us. And we'll stop partway through to see if people have any questions. And then again at the end, and if there are existing questions that we can't cover today, we'd love to have you put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will capture those to kind of check in with Stephen afterwards. But I am very excited to turn my mic off for a bit and just listen to Dr. Krashen. So welcome.
Okay. My focus today is on a well-known set of terms, acquisition and learning. The fact that acquisition is subconscious. While it's happening, we don't know it's happening. And learning is conscious, knowing the rules, okay? We focus on conscious learning in classes, and I'm going to talk about this a great deal as we go, even though it doesn't work well. The problem is, I'll talk about this later, people don't even know that conscious learning exists. In the outside world, not among educators, not among language educators, it's only learning acquisition hardly exists at all. And we have this idea that the harder we work on conscious learning, the better we're going to be. I'm going to begin with some quick evidence from Steve Kaufman, polyglot, whom I'm friendly with. He's a very impressive guy. Look at this. 8 languages between ages 61 and 71. Isn't that encouraging? No question. I've hung out with him and I've heard him speak languages. He's the real thing. Here's what Steve says. Here's what happens when he consults grammar books. And I think we can all kind of identify with this. He says, I'd usually remember grammar rules or explanations if I understood them only for a short period of time and then forget them. In the end, it was only through enough exposure to the language that my grammar improved. That's the whole theory right there. We acquire language, not learn, but acquire language when we understand what we hear, when we read, when we obtain what is called comprehensible input. I wrote an article about this, I think about 10 years ago, called Who Invented Comprehensible Input? And I tried to make it clear that I'm the author of the paper, but I didn't invent comprehensible input. It was there a long time before I got into it. A lot of people talk about it in language and literacy and et cetera. I'm just advertising it, saying that this is the right way to acquire language, no question. We do not acquire language when we speak or write. We do not acquire language when we consciously learn grammar rules, okay, or when we get corrected. And these are the core of language classes, unfortunately. The ability to speak, the ability to write is the result of language acquisition, not the cause. Interesting. I became aware of this issue when I was beginning ESL teacher training, taking a class, and this is when I didn't know, this is before the theory, and we all had to do practice lessons, and I created a lesson and gave it to a group of beginning students, and I told them a story. And the supervisor said, no, no, you shouldn't be talking. They should be talking. He was wrong. I was right. This is quite a shock to the field. Input is what counts in language acquisition. The best input is comprehensible. And here's a new vocabulary word, compelling. Compelling means so interesting, you may even forget that it's in another language. Okay. And there has to be a lot of it. Let me give you some examples of language lessons, some good, some bad. Here's example number one. I'm gonna use a language I'm sure you've heard before, and maybe some of you speak it, but probably not too many. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte Ihnen voraus sagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. Not very comprehensible. Didn't do you very much good. Here's lesson number 2. And you have to look at me on the screen, sorry. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Stehen Sie das? Kopf, ja. Und hier sind meine Ohren. Ohren. Wie viele Ohren? 1, 2, 3 Augen, ja? I mean, 3 Ohren. I'm getting this wrong. 3 Ohren. Nein, ich habe nur 2 Ohren. Augen, Augen. Wie viele Augen? 1, 2, 2 Augen, ja? If you understood what I was saying, you acquired a little bit of German. And the interesting part is that you can't help it. This is actually the most interesting part of the theory, in my opinion. And this comes from Noam Chomsky, of course. If you get comprehensible input and you pay attention to it and you understand it, and it has in it language you haven't acquired and you're ready to acquire, you will acquire a little of that. Not every bit, but you get some of it each time. It requires no discipline, no effort, and even more strange, you can't decide not to do it. It's involuntary. If you get interesting, comprehensible input, you will acquire. You can't stop. Chomsky says the language acquisition device is like hearing. It's a mental organ. You can't stop it. You can't decide if your ears are clean and the input is loud enough, you will hear it. You can't decide not to hear it. If you open your eyes and you look around, you can't decide not to see it, not to see. It's an organ in your brain and you can't help doing it. The same thing. If the input is comprehensible, and there's new language in it and you understand it, you will start to acquire it. I'm going to focus today on one kind of for the next few minutes, next kind of comprehensible input that I think is very, very useful for us in our daily lives as teachers and as scholars. Reading. I have been obsessed with the idea of free voluntary reading, reading because you want to. This happened to me as a result of my secondary school education. I had all English secondary school in the United States in the Midwest, and we had language arts class. We had British literature, we did American literature. All of it was assigned. All of it was classics. I did the assigned reading. I did the homework. I wrote the papers, etc. I got reasonable grades in the class. I don't remember a single book that we read, not one. But I do remember the things I read on my own during those years in first language. I remember all of it and I can tell you all about it. I'll tell you what I read when I was in a junior high school and high school, what I decided. Number one, I read comic books. I am convinced that Spider-Man is one of the most interesting characters in all of world literature, okay? I read comic books. I read baseball stories. John R. Tunis, stories about the Dodgers made up team, etc. Fascinating. I wrote several papers, in fact, about these books and how interesting they were. And I remember all of them today. In fact, I can't resist it, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the John R. Tunis books. It's called The Keystone Kids, about a baseball team he made up. And the team, the manager of the team retired, and they're looking for a new manager. And the new owner decided to appoint the shortstop, a player, to be a manager, which is kind of unusual. And he was a kid, 26 years old, very unusual. So the new manager, Spike Russell, gave a sermon to his team in order to, assert him and show them that he really was competent, and gave them some advice. And I have read and reread this article, this section, many, many times. If you remember baseball, how it works, if you're a fielder and someone hits the ball to you, you pick it up, you throw it to first base. If the first baseman gets it before the runner gets to first base, he's out. Otherwise, he can, stay on first base and go around and score runs. This is in professional baseball. If you hit a ground ball to an infielder, you're going to be out. I'd say 99 times out of 100. This is the big leagues. These are professionals. Spike Russell said to his new players that he was the manager of, he said, when you hit that ball on the ground and you think you're going to be out, don't just walk to first base. Run like hell. You don't know. The fielder may drop the ball. The throw might be wild. And you may lose a chance of winning the game because of your laziness. In other words, be impeccable in everything you do. I've thought about this ever since I read that passage. A friend of mine who's a doctor, Seymour Pearl, also a baseball fan, he read the book and he said, this is true of medicine too. You have a patient who has a disease, something wrong, and you know what to do. You know you can prescribe a medicine, and 99 times out of 100, it's going to work. Don't worry about it. Be impeccable. Make sure the patient has the medicine. Make sure the patient takes it. Make sure there are no after effects, no side effects, which is very rare, but make sure anyway. Since I read this, I try to be impeccable in all these little things. When I wash the dishes, I make sure they're clean before I put them away, etc. It's quite good. Okay. So the free voluntary reading is what counts. It's reading that you understand, that you want to read, that you find interesting, and it's not assigned reading. It's reading that you select yourself. When I was in the third grade, I was in the low reading group. My father brought home comic books. And he said, Stephen, I'll get all the comics you want. Within 2 years, I was in the top reading group. It absolutely worked. So comic books, science fiction, baseball stories, that did it for me. I'm going to list 3 benefits of free voluntary reading, which I am very excited about. I think they can change the profession and make our lives much, much easier. And you know about them already, many of you. First of all, speaking and writing ability, grammar, spelling, vocabulary, our ability to produce language fluently doesn't come from producing, it comes from input. It comes from mostly from reading and to some extent from listening. There's a huge amount of research on this, and I have attempted to report on all this in a book I wrote in 2004 called The Power of Reading. And I do recommend this book to you. I hope you'll look at it. Don't buy it new. The prices are over $20 now, but you can get it used for $2 or less. So check it out. All the research is there. I want to add to this research studies all over the place with one study that is now my favorite. It's called Sophia's Choice. Sophia was a ESL student who came to the United States between around fifth grade. And at her school, she came from China, native speaker of Mandarin. In that school, what they did is they gave the students an English test at the beginning of the year, and then another English test at the end of the year to see how much they improved. Okay. During the year, they had the standard ESL classes. Sophia got worse. Her scores went down during the year. Oh my. Well, but then she went home during the summer. When she came back, when the summer was over, Her scores came up to the norm and went above. What was she doing over the summer? Well, this was in Los Angeles, which gets pretty hot in the summer. During the summer, she went to the local public library and she went to the children's book section, easy reading books for children. What did she read? Sweet Valley High, books that kids like and enjoy. Uh, Nancy Drew books, etc., detective stories. I've read some of these books, and you have too, I'm sure, and they're quite good. The stories are actually fairly compelling, in my opinion. That's what happened. She didn't do the reading in order to improve her English. She did the reading because she liked it. She averaged about 50 books over the summer because she liked them, okay? She couldn't put them down, and she selected the ones that she liked. Well, there's a fair amount of research on this. I've just given you a couple of examples, but the critics have gone to work on this too. They say, well, if you read what you want to read, you're going to get lots of easy vocabulary. Kids aren't going to push themselves, etc. No, this isn't actually true. Jeff McQuillan at USC has done several papers on this, that when kids read this so-called light reading, they get a lot of academic vocabulary as well. One study he did, he looked at the 7 Harry Potter novels, and he estimated from examining the words in the context that you will pick up about 204 academic words by reading Harry Potter. If you do this by formal study, it's going to cost much, much more time, much, much more painful. It's much more efficient to do it through reading. So that's number one. When you read for pleasure, you get grammar, you get vocabulary, you get writing style, etc. Not bad. Number two, those who read more know more. They know more about everything. Those who read more for pleasure, they know more about science, social studies, current events, finance, health, technology, cultural knowledge, etc., etc. This is a brilliant study that I like so much. I even listed it on the handout. Stanovich and Cunningham, 1993. There hasn't been a study like that since it came out. It's absolutely marvelous. They went to a local high school and they gave the students tests of subject matter on all these areas. Then they asked them about their reading habits. The ones, and asked them about their familiarity with current popular literature, with magazines, with popular novels. The ones who did the most pleasure reading, who knew the most about popular books, etc., did better on this knowledge test, and it was quite dramatic, okay? They asked them if they had heard of Maya Angelou, Stephen King, if they read magazines like Ladies' Home Journal. What was not a strong predictor was how well you did in school, otherwise known as grade point average. Grade point average was a very weak predictor of general knowledge. Pleasure reading that you did was a very good predictor. My goodness. There's a big push right now for kids to get background knowledge. People have discovered that the more background knowledge you have, the more comprehensible your reading is. So people are recommending that we give kids lots of instruction on subject matter knowledge, then they'll do better in reading. Probably, yeah. But if they read for pleasure, they'll get knowledge that way. They'll get lots of knowledge, and that knowledge will also make the reading much, much better. So far, reading for pleasure gives you two things. We're not done yet. It gives you literacy, that is vocabulary, grammar, spelling, etc. And it also gives you knowledge that we want kids to have, okay? It's very similar to what we hope they get in school, but they can get it through pleasure reading. 3, those who read more understand others more. They have more empathy. There is boring research on this, and I'm not going to go through it. Instead, I'm going to quote some famous people who agree with this. Terry Gross, who's a radio personality in Los Angeles area, the program is Fresh Air. When you read fiction, you're learning in part empathy. You're learning to be someone else, learning to see the world through their eyes. Isn't that wonderful? When you read fiction, you become the character. You go through the same adventures, the same decisions. Another person who said the same thing, Barack Obama. When I think about how I understand my role as citizen, the most important stuff I've learned, I think I've learned from novels. It has to do with empathy. It has to do with being comfortable with the notion the world is complicated and full of grays, but there's still truth there to be found. It's possible to connect with someone else, even though they're very different from you. And the third, Noam Chomsky, it's quite possible and overwhelmingly probable we'll always learn more about human life and personality from novels than from scientific psychology. So fiction is a wonderful source of information to find out about other people and how other people think. Well, I've been talking about reading, and I want to balance this by talking just a bit about writing. Writing, the more you write, does not mean the better you'll write. Writing itself is output. We acquire language by input, not by output. But writing does something else. Writing helps thinking. You write something down, you run into what are called writer's blocks. You don't know where to go next. What am I going to say about this, etc. Writer's blocks are wonderful. I would like us to respect and be happy when we encounter writing blocks. It means you're about to learn something new. The earliest paper I found of this was a mathematician named Poincaré. And he says when he reaches a block in his work, after a preliminary period of conscious work, he'd get up from his desk and do something mindless, put more wood on the fire. Returning to his work, parts of the solution, little bits, would come. For me, my writing process, and I write all day long, is starting to write, running into trouble, a writer's block, taking a short break, doing something mindless, as Poincaré recommends, coming back to the writing, and the log jam has started to break up a little at a time. Your subconscious mind wants to help you. Isn't that wonderful? Wants to help you past the writer's block. So for me, the writing process is write, block, take a break, come back and work. And during that break, I do something mindless, like clean up, wash a few dishes, etc. And you get through the boring work of life as well. Eckhart Tolle said the same thing. All true artists, whether they know it or not, create from a place of no mind, from inner stillness. We can create that and tap into our subconscious. So my advice is, and this is what I do too, take a break when you have a problem, but keep pencil and paper with you all the time. You never know when your subconscious is going to give you a hint of the answer you're looking for to solve the problem that you're concerned about. I have notebooks and pens and papers all over the house, including you know where, okay? And it works, let me tell you.
Dr. Krashen, I
Yes.
just wanted to interrupt you for a minute because we're about halfway through our time. And I said to everyone we would give a chance for any questions if people want to come on unmute about something you've said already. Or you can put that in the chat. And I'm not going to be able to see the chat while I'm still sharing exactly. So I'm going to stop for a moment sharing and see if anyone wants to unmute and come on with any questions or to put something into the chat. So I'll give a moment.
Okay.
Dr. Krashen, I loved your thoughts about being impeccable. It reminds me of a phrase my husband uses all the time. He says, how you do something is how you do everything. So he tries to instill excellence in every detail. And I think of that phrase, you know, when you go to do something not quite properly, think how you do something is how you do everything. But it reminds me of your be impeccable story. I really liked that story. Thank you.
All right. I like your husband. Okay, good.
Thanks.
Okay.
And we have in the chat, Anne is saying, I assume you would support all the graphic novels today.
I love graphic novels. Absolutely. I got involved in all this, the Spider-Man thing, when I started reading Spider-Man comic books to my son. And after he fell asleep, I would be up till dawn reading through all of them, and I still find them completely irresistible. I'm going to really name drop now. I once had lunch with the inventor of Spider-Man, Stan Lee. I guess this is a great experience, unforgettable. Stan Lee gave a talk at a local school, and I found out, and I went over to hear him talk, and it was, of course, absolutely wonderful. And I asked a question from the audience. I said, when is Peter Parker going to go to graduate school? Because Peter Parker is kind of a scientific genius, invented all these, the web shooters, all these things. He said, hang around, I want to talk to you. So we had a little conversation. And in the conversation, he said, who do you think is my favorite character in the Marvel Universe? I said, I don't know. He said, the Silver Surfer. Let me tell you about the Silver Surfer. The Silver Surfer is the most tortured character in the Marvel Universe in all comic book literature. The bad people, the villains, have kidnapped his parents and holds them captive. And he threatens to kill them if they don't do evil deeds for him. This is someone with real problems all the time. The comics get better when you have problems. And that's what Spider-Man comics has done. Constant problems. I'm going to take advantage of being on the platform here and tell you one Spider-Man story to show you how good these things are. A complete answer to the question. In this comic book, Spider-Man is coming back from an adventure. And he's swinging, from building to building, etc. And he hears the sound of an accident. And he goes down to the surface. A young lady's been driving, and her car is hit from behind by another car. There's been quite a bit of damage. The ambulance has been called. He talks to the paramedics or the medics, and they tell him, we got to get her to the hospital fast. She probably needs a transplant of one of her kidneys. Do you know of any relatives? So Spider-Man goes up to the girl, and she says, yes, I live with my twin brother, Donnie. Here's our address. So of course, Spider-Man goes dashing off to the address. And of course, coincidence, on the roof, there's a young man about to jump. Could it be Donnie? Well, of course it is. Spider-Man calls up. He determines that it is Donnie, and he says, don't jump, don't jump. Donnie looks down, sees Spider-Man, and says, I'm going to jump, and you can't stop me. I've got problems I just can't face. Besides, you're a superhero. What do you know about problems? What do you know? You got tenure. What do you know about problems? Okay. And Spider-Man says, you think life is easy behind this mask? And he thinks of his problems, breaking up with his girlfriend every couple of weeks. Constant problems with the owner of the magazine, of newspaper he works for, who constantly thinks Spider-Man is evil. Problem after problem after problem. And Spider-Man says, Donnie, life is problems. This is a comic book. Life is problems for all of us every day, constantly. And we grow by facing our problems, not by running away. Besides, if you jump, you're killing your sister as well. And Spider-Man says, okay, for my sister. Anyway, Donnie says, for my sister, and comes down off the ledge. This is what we see in comic books. It's good stuff all the time, okay? Oh, the last frame of the comic, Spider-Man is leaving the scene of the incident. He says, well, this one turned out okay. Donnie's still depressed, and there's not much I can do about that. You can't solve everybody's problems. This is what we see in comic book literature, in my opinion, especially in graphic novels. It's excellent. Gets getting better all the time. Can I go on to the next part? Okay. A few more comments. Okay.
Yes, that would be great. And let me share again so we can follow along if you'd like to see some of the highlights in the outline.
Okay, I'm at the tension between acquisition and learning. Here's the problem we are facing now. Language acquisition is just about totally unknown among the public. The public only knows about language learning, and the same thing is true of many professionals in literacy. Learning is the only game in town. When we talk about improving curricula, we want to improve spelling, we want to do more phonics drills, etc. Things that are conscious learning. Actually, people have experienced acquisition, but they don't associate it with a feeling of satisfaction that you get from conscious learning. I know the rule, etc. Uh, I faced this when I was invited to talk to a wealthy business person who came to USC and wanted to talk to an expert. He wanted to improve his accent in English. I thought it was pretty good anyway, but he wanted to make it better. And I was invited to talk to him. I was driven to a fancy set of offices, etc. And I told him what I thought about accent improvement, that accent is really a marker of what club you're a member of. And it's not that easy to change with instruction. In fact, instruction is really not done very well, very good job of it. He was disgusted with me. He called the car to bring me back to my place. And as I was leaving, I said, well, how would you like it if I told you we could bring in a sound spectrograph and you could talk into it, sentences in English, and you can practice until you make it sound like the way I would do it, a native speaker. He says, yes, this is the way to do it. This is the way to go. This is what the public thinks. If you give them rules, you give them grammar, you give them practice, drill, this is fine. Also, conscious learning is very profitable. The business that's going on now in phonics, the science of reading, etc. This is great news for people who want to sell textbooks and want to have programs, etc. Textbooks, courses, exams, etc. Acquisition is free. You can get all the interesting, comprehensible input you want from libraries. It's full of wonderful books. So there's very little incentive on the side of selfish capitalists. Not all capitalists are like this. I know some wonderful capitalists who try to do the right thing for everybody, but there are some who are simply out to make money, period. Okay. Learning also doesn't work very well. And it's for most of us, it's painful. It's very hard. It's very hard to think about rules when you're speaking, when you're getting corrected, etc. Okay. I didn't realize that acquisition existed until I was teaching an ESL class in my first job at Queens College. And I was doing the verb system. And I gave a lecture on the present progressive tense. John is playing the violin. And I told the students, this is actually ambiguous. The present progressive can mean two things. It can mean future tense. What's John doing next week? He's playing the violin. What's that noise in the next room? John's playing the violin. It could be what's happening now. And one student said, yeah, you're right. It can mean either of those. How did she get it? It was acquired. That didn't occur to me until years later, okay? I have another hypothesis coming up now, which gives me another reason to build more respect for acquisition. And this is an observation of myself, and I'm curious to know if it's true of you too. I have come to the hypothesis that if something's acquired, you don't forget it. If it's consciously learned, you do. This hit me when I was thinking back on something that happened to me at a pharmacy near where I live. I went in, it's about 7-8 years ago, and the clerk behind the counter had a very obvious German accent. So I spoke to her in German, and her answer was in German. Oh, how long have you been here? She thought I was a native speaker. Okay. And we had a nice conversation, etc. Your German is so perfect, etc. I had not spoken German probably in 15 years when I had that conversation. But my German came through acquisition. It came from a year in Vienna when I went there to study music and piano, and I wound up spending more time reading German, going to German classes and hanging out with German speakers. It came to me mostly through acquisition. The same thing happened to French. Most of my French comes from reading science fiction novels in French, which are really wonderful. And the same thing is true. I found to my surprise, I visited a class, I had an invitation to go to a subject matter French class. And I found myself having a conversation with the instructors afterwards in French. And I realized I was actually doing pretty well. I didn't realize I spoke French that well. It's because it came from acquisition, okay? Even Amharic, a language I don't speak well at all, but what I have came from acquisition. I was in the Peace Corps 2 years in Ethiopia, and I made the acquaintance of another former Peace Corps volunteer who had volunteered to do a third year after his Peace Corps. And I had had formal instruction in Amharic, which we all did. And it was all grammar, 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 grammar. That's all we knew about, and the instruction was all grammar. I even hired a tutor my first year, and he helped me with grammar, 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 and none of it worked. Then I made friends with a guy named Brian McCauley. Actually, I made friends the first week I was there. He stopped by and invited me and another guy out for beer. It's a very, very nice guy. Brian had picked up Amharic from people around him. His Amharic was quite imperfect. He made lots of mistakes, but it was very functional, and I understood most of what he said because it was in a context that was comprehensible, and he used a lot of simple vocabulary. 60 years ago, that happened. I can still speak some Amharic, no question, okay? My encounter at Kaiser, it's in the notes, very proud of this one. Went to Kaiser a couple of months ago because my wife had some growths on her foot and the doctor decided to take some x-rays. Turns out it was nothing, but it was good to know. And when we went into the x-ray area, the guy behind the counter was from Eritrea. He spoke near Ethiopia and he spoke Amharic. And my wife is African American. So, and he was commenting to someone else in Amharic. Yeah, who's this white guy with this woman? What's going on? So I in Amharic, and I interrupted in Amharic, and I said, "What do you mean, white guy? I'm from Ethiopia. And I made all kinds of using everyday slang talk. We became very good friends after that. It was quite nice. Uh, but it was still there. That was the point. The everyday Amharic that I picked up from Brian, even though it's imperfect, is still with me. Bad input is good for you, I have determined. It's all right. The great case for the foolishness of putting all your eggs in the grammar basket is the case of Francois Goumin. Francois Goumin was a French scholar who got very excited about, sorry, he's a German, he was studying French, and he went to France and found that he didn't understand very much, and he studied grammar. He studied grammar diligently. He memorized the grammar in textbooks. He studied as hard as he could. He memorized verbs, memorized nouns. He did as much as he possibly could, okay? What happened? He could hardly say a word. He decided he'll practice speaking, okay? He went to a hairdresser salon and slowly put together sentences, one or two words at a time, and all the customers did was laugh and barely understand what he was saying. This was the ultimate authority, the ultimate attempt to do it 100% through grammar study, okay? This is the classical process that he did when he studied Greek and Latin, okay? He claims it took him 10 days to fully master the grammar of German. I'm sorry, it was German, not French. He then found that he understood nothing, zero. Then he went back and memorized verb roots. And looking at the book, did 800 verb roots in 4 days, zero comprehension, etc. He finally realized he didn't give up on the classic method. He returned to reading hard texts, translated them one sentence at a time, looking up every single word. Nothing, 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 nothing. Here's his own comment at the end. He didn't give up on the classical method. He still believed the hard study of grammar is the path. He said, so my work on roots and verbs was in vain. I could not bring myself to believe this seriously. The fire smolders under the ashes, I assured myself. We'll brighten up little by little. We must read day in, day out, translate, hunt 100 times after the same word in the dictionary, catch it 100 times. After 100 times, release it. We shall finish by taming it. But after another week of this, I had hardly interpreted the meaning of 8 pages. The 9th did not promise to be less obscure or less laborious. He then bought a number of popular books that promised to teach the reader German, and found they gave contradictory advice. None of them worked. He said the book made the fortune of its author without producing the results sought for by him. Over and over again, people had done diligent study of grammar, and it has never, ever worked. Yet this is what we do in our language classes more and more. I was a victim of this in my high school French class. I took it seriously. I studied the grammar, and I failed the class. I was given a passing grade only under the condition that I never study French at that school again because I did so poorly about it. So it's acquisition that works. The problem is, to repeat, acquisition does not make money. You can get the input you want cheaply from easy books, etc., and you can get a lot of those at the library or Friendly People. Okay. Conscious learning is a gold mine in terms of money. And this is, I think, why it survives. Okay, that is the end of my ranting for today. Are there any questions, boys and girls?
Yes, we'll open it up again now for our final round of comments, questions, clarifications. Mary has her hand up, so please unmute Mary, and we'd love to hear your question or comment.
Hi, Dr. Krashen, how are you?
Sleepy and tired, how are you?
Same. I just wanted to clarify what you said, that a student will, and correct me, because I'm wanting to make sure I got it right, that they're processing or acquiring language or our grammar rules by the books that they're choosing versus the assigned reading. Is that what you said?
Not quite. I haven't been clear. What should happen? They should be reading for pleasure. And if they're reading for pleasure and the book is comprehensible, easy books, they will subconsciously absorb the grammar. Let me give you one more case history to make the point. I live pretty close to a supermarket, Ralph's in the Ralph's chain. And I went in there one day and found that they had opened it up to people to come late, which is fine for me. Okay. And I'm sorry, early in the morning, which is fine for me at my age. We wake up early. And there was new people there. And the person behind the counter, this is about 2 years ago, his name was on his jacket and it was a Hispanic name. So I, of course, spoke to him in Spanish. And my Spanish at the time was not very good, just barely functional. He answered me in English and said, "We have been instructed by the bosses that we can only speak English to customers." So I continued in Spanish. I said, "Fidel, tú puedes ayudarme, you can help me. My goal is to speak Spanish the way you do." Okay. He said, "Great. We've been speaking Spanish ever since." And I've become very popular at the supermarket. Other customers come over, try to talk to me. It's really nice. My Spanish has improved remarkably, but it's not from talking to Fidel. What I started doing is I would go home and I would read easy books in Spanish. They're called graded readers. They're fantastic. The good thing about graded readers, and this is true in many languages, is they've gradually become literature. And I have found out who the good authors are. And I started reading graded readers. I've been reading graded readers in Spanish for more than the last year. Ahora yo puedo hablar español. It's really much better. Friends I've used to speak a little Spanish with are saying, "Steve, what have you been doing? Your Spanish is so much better." I haven't been talking more. I haven't been translating more. I haven't been studying grammar. I've been reading lots and lots of very easy, highly comprehensible Spanish. Try this yourself. If you're interested in another language, find easy stuff to read. The problem is there's not very much of it. In Spanish, there's lots of good authors, okay? In other languages, the only one I know is Mandarin, and Haiyun Lu has a very interesting collection in Mandarin. And I've tried those, and my Mandarin has actually gotten fairly okay. Just from reading these books in Mandarin for about a year, I've reached the point where I can have kind of a basic conversation with people, which is quite remarkable, all right? Try it yourself. You will find that it works. Again, the answer is lots and lots of easy but interesting reading. It's hard to combine interesting and comprehensible and find books that are both. but Hayun Liu has done it, and a lot of authors in Spanish have done it, in my opinion, getting better all the time. So yes, reading counts if it's interesting and comprehensible. Algo más. Any other questions?
While we're waiting for another question, I just put in the chat again toward the end here, the links that I shared earlier. So the links to the outline of what Dr. Krashen's saying, his website, and then the Multilingual Learner Hub. And it made me think of that we're gathering at Towson University. There are on that Multilingual Learner Hub, under both the teacher resources and the family resources, there's a whole section in the links about free open access digital books in different languages. So, and a lot of them are easy to read. So there's one source you can click around, like Global Storybooks is one that I usually show people. It's very simple. It has lots of different languages, so you can see the words as you're reading them, and sometimes you can even click on the sound button and it has a native speaker pronouncing the words too. So if you want to try that yourself, Dr. Krashen's thoughts about that input and seeing the pictures and the comprehensible input through those digital books, that might be a source for you to try out with you or your students.
It's got to be, well, your goal is to make it so interesting you forget that it's in another language.
And I can't say they're always interesting. So
exactly. We're getting better at it. A colleague of mine, I think, is doing a very good job with this. Her name is Beniko Mason. She teaches English in Japan. And here's what she does. And she has data on this. She's published papers. I've co-authored some of them. I think it's good. Students come to EFL class. This is in Japan. English is a foreign language. And the teacher tells stories in simple English. She illustrates the stories using a chalkboard all the time. She comes prepared with pictures. There was an old man, there's a man with a beard, etc. And he lived on a street, and there's the street. Story after story. I love this idea. That's the whole first semester. That's all that happens. And it's especially good for night people who are kind of groggy in the morning. You come to school the first day, first class is, you listen to stories. Isn't that wonderful? After a semester of this, the second semester is easy reading. She has a wonderful collection of graded readers in English, and there are a lot of them. The kids come into class the first day of the second semester, and the table in the middle of the room is covered with easy graded readers, and the students can browse and pick the ones they like, and they don't have to finish each one. They're not tested on it. And in English, there are plenty of them. That's the good news. So I think for English as a foreign language, we've pretty well got the combination of how to get students to the point where they can start to read authentic and listen to authentic input. Okay, so that's a good way of doing it. Stories and graded readers.
thank you. And there's a follow-up question in the chat from Caitlin asking, do you double check that you say the words correctly? For example, the OUGH has many sounds in English like bought, though, rough. It's that same spelling, but it's pronounced differently. So do you have thoughts about that?
I would say don't worry about it. It will be, as we say, acquired with time. The rules are too complicated to learn, and they are absorbed by thousands and thousands of first and second language acquirers with no problem. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would just be pleasantly surprised and pleased when you find that they've absorbed it. Trust acquisition.
Another question from Ashley, do you recommend something like Duolingo along with reading to get the pronunciation?
I have not looked at Duolingo. Every 3 days, I get an invitation to examine someone's materials, and I just can't. There's not enough hours in the day. But you guys know what to do now. You can try it yourself, see if it works, see if you're getting better, see if some of your students are getting better, see if it's comprehensible and interesting. So there's too many systems going around for me to have a professional opinion about each one of them. Okay. Easy reading, easy stories, a lot of it. Great advice from Steve Kaufman, which I must pass on. Oh gosh, I had just arrived in Mexico where I was going to spend some time with Spanish teachers. And at the time, my Spanish was really bad. And I read something by Kaufman, which really helped. It said, don't worry about your mistakes. Nobody cares. Isn't that wonderful? Gradually, it will get better over time. And that has helped me a great deal.
Mary, you have a follow-up question?
Dr. Krashen, you're giving me heart palpitations. It'll get better. Trust it. Trust the process. It'll be. So my question is, like you said, easy reads for our friends that are learning to read. Like a friend that I'm working with now, he would be happy to read the same graphic novel over and over and over and over again. There aren't any like paragraphs. He's just reading the captions and the pictures, the boom, pow, and all that. And it's great and he loves it. My question is if we continue to let them read what's easy or what is of interest to them, how do we push them like, okay, friend, you can read this Lexile, whatever. We got to get you to continue your learning, continue your reading, using your method, like what you said. How do we push them on to the next level if their comfort level is easy and it's that graphic novel when we know they are competent with that level?
I think, Mary, we should do an experiment. We should try it out, let people alone, and see if they gradually move on to more complicated things. I think they will. This is what happens in first language. Students don't stay with easy stuff, and it's interest that pushes them forward. You don't read the easy stuff you did when you were 10 years old, okay? It's interesting books, more interesting. You go with what you want to find out, and the language automatically gets harder. And we don't have to get progress with every single book we read or every single paragraph. No problem. Again, I have really been very pleased with what's happened to me in my own self-experimentation. And I encourage you to do the same thing. Try a language that you're beginning or advanced beginner in and you want to get better in, see if it works for you. The hard part is finding the books that are interesting and comprehensible and being able to afford them, which is why I like used books so much.
I know as a teacher in my years of experience with really reluctant readers who were struggling at, older elementary, middle school grades, that often was the key to turning them on to wanting to read. It's that, choice. They find something that they like, like the Captain Underpants things for the fourth grade boys that it's kind of drivel, but, they liked it and finally saw the point of trying to want to read. So I am an advocate of learning some of the basics, with the phonics and phonemic awareness as well. So I have to say that, but I think your points about like actually loving and remembering and learning have to be some of that choice and interest, or it's never going to happen.
I would never say, if you teach phonics, you go to jail. No, a little bit of phonics is okay. The absolute basics. Beyond initial consonants, it's not going to do that much good. That's what I get from reading the literature and my own experience. Okay. Let me recommend a couple of ways of encouraging reading. And these are articles that have appeared in the school library journal. First one's called Spider-Man in the Library. They put comic books in open spaces in the school and allowed kids to just look at them. Reading of everything increased. Things taken out from the library, not just comic books, but other things as well. Another brilliant language arts teacher encouraged students, if they like a book in general, this is for English as a first language or second language, put a mark in it. Then other kids will know that someone liked this book. And some books get 10, 20, 30 marks, and the reading increases. These have not gone beyond the couple of articles I've read about it because nobody makes money on it, but it certainly, I think, is worth a try.
I love the idea of there's like stars on the book to recommend for your peers, and then everybody's interested in it.
Absolutely. Costs nothing. Why not? So you don't need accelerated reader with prizes, things like that.
Mhm. We have 2 minutes left in our time this afternoon. So anyone else have any questions or comments?
Okay, we've settled all issues. Amazing.
I'm not sure, but good start, huh? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate this time that we've been able to spend together.